Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. This is the Policy Review Committee, and we'll start with a roll call.
Chair Brown.
Here.
Board Member Cole.
Present.
Give me one moment and we'll have Board Member Pierce. I'll continue with the roll and come back. Ms. Klein.
Present.
Ms. Beasley.
Present.
Ms. Ellingson.
Present.
Ms. White.
Here.
Dr. Pierce.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Wonderful. Thank you. And welcome to all. I think I first want to introduce our newest member of the committee, Frances Beasley. Frances has a wonderful background and one that helps provide us another perspective. Spent quite a few years with the City of Columbus doing environmental work, as well as with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Has done some teaching in Columbus schools and is now retired. And Frances, anything else that you'd like to add or correct?
Nothing except I'm excited to be a part of the committee, and I hope that I can bring something to the committee that can assist you with your policy. I'm a policy person, so I'm looking forward to working with you on the Policy Review Committee.
Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us. And I'm just curious, Emily, are you still in France?
Yes,
And it's mid-afternoon, am I right?
that's right. But got to return
Okay.
to, so we'll be back soon.
Well, great. Nice of you to make the commitment to participate, even from France, where you could be doing all kinds of wonderful things. Our meeting this morning will be focusing primarily on the equity policy. But before we get to that, we do need to approve minutes from the last meetings, from the April 9th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Chair Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Cole.
Yes.
Dr. Pierce.
Yes.
Ms. Beasley.
Yes.
Ms. Klein.
Aye.
Ms. Ellingson.
Aye.
Ms. White.
Yes.
That motion carries.
Thank you. So what we'll be taking up is primarily the equity policy, and we'll lead with that. And our goal will be to actually complete a policy that we can recommend to the board for the board's next meeting. And as I've said a number of times, adopting the policy, we want it to be right, but it's not set in stone. And as we continue to learn and evolve in how we achieve equity, including with the addition of a chief equity officer, who starts on August 1, we'll be able to go back and revisit the policy and make sure we capture all the things that we would like to have. Beyond that on the agenda, we've got a draft for a policy for states of emergency, and we have policy on late arrival and early dismissal. That would be 5320. And that's everything on the agenda for today. I wanted to save room for our primary item. Anybody have anything, any questions at this point? Hearing none, let's just dive right in. We have a number of drafts, one of which is the Columbus City Schools equity policy from several years back. I don't see any need to go into discussion about how and when there was a lapse in this policy continuing, but this could be a starting point for going forward. It's a policy that I think the district has been essentially operating on, without knowing until a year or two ago that it wasn't on the books. We also have sample policies from a number of other school districts. I believe these are all policies that have been reviewed and adopted by their respective school districts far more recently. We've got one from Cincinnati Public Schools. We've got Seattle Public Schools, Portland Public Schools, Baltimore, and I think that's it. Hopefully, everybody has spent a little bit of time with these. Does anybody have any suggestion about where we start, which of these they do or don't like, and why?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
good morning. Good morning, all. The two favorite of the examples that were provided for me are between Baltimore City Public Schools. In addition to that, Seattle. I thought the preamble language for both were very strong and addressed all of the issues that we know directly relate to any number of disadvantages that our students face that are within the equity lens. When I say equity lens, I'm using the language from the Baltimore policy that states any program, practice, decision, or action, the impact on all students is addressed with strategic focus on marginalized student groups. So in my mind, this encapsulates quite a number of our students, from race to gender identification, to economic disadvantage as well. This is really important to me that we have some very strong preamble language in our policy that states with clarity why this is important to us, and who it is that we're looking at this policy serving. If I may just very quickly read what Baltimore stated. Baltimore City Public Schools acknowledges the historical, generational, and compounding reality of the systems, structures, and practices that have intentionally created and continued to afford advantages to some groups while perpetuating racial inequities for others. The district must take responsibility and action for removing and actively repairing these inequities to ensure positive educational outcomes for children. Through this policy, City Schools owns its role in creating and implementing policies and practices that result in predictably lowering academic and graduation outcomes and disproportionate disciplinary action for students of color than for their white peers. The district recognizes that these disparities contradict the beliefs and values we articulate about what students can achieve and the role of adults in ensuring conditions for success, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like some incorporation of strong language along those lines is paramount. I'm now pulling up the Seattle piece if my equipment would take longer than all year. Again, I love the preamble language in Seattle's piece that's in the second paragraph. The concept of educational equity goes beyond formal equality, where all students are treated the same, to fostering a barrier-free environment where all students, regardless of their race, class, or other personal characteristics such as creed, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, age, economic status, gender, sexual orientation, including gender expression or identity, et cetera, et cetera. I think that strong preamble language, and I keep going back to that, is really important for us to help shape the narrative for the reader and also define, identify the guidelines for any equity personnel that's going to come on and understand where it is we stand on this and what the framework is to operate within. I thank you. I like the definitions as well. I would definitely want to incorporate the definitions utilized in the Baltimore policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Emily White here. I have some thoughts since we have been going through this equity policy, and I agree with all of the above on the mission and the asserting our values needs to be upfront. But since we have been discussing this, the curriculum audit report has come out. And one of the things that the audit report really highlights a need for is making sure that the equity policy is really linked to sort of action plans, to monitoring, to make sure that there's actual policies in place to make sure that the values that we express are actually carried out in an accountable way. And in light of those recommendations, I mean, essentially what the equity policy includes now is a 3 to 5 year plan that will be reported annually to the board about how compliance is met. But I wonder if we might be able to beef that up a little bit more, or be a little bit more specific, or have other things. The other thing about our plan also is it's very much school-based, and I think that's certainly appropriate. That's one lens to view equity, but I wonder if there might be other ways that we can look at equity across the district that's not necessarily focused specifically on a particular building.
Thank you. Some others?
I'm not sure. Are we just jumping in? Are we using
Yes.
our raise hand? All right. So I agree with what board member Cole stated, as well as committee member White. When we talk about our review of our current board policy, we definitely need to incorporate more robust and thorough language around our purpose and definition section, similar to Baltimore City's equity policy. Specifically, I recommend that we revise the third paragraph that begins with the resource constraints in our district. This paragraph should really focus on what our board, administration, and district will do to foster equity. Specifically, I would like to see the section identify key performance indicators across diverse areas that we then focus on positively influencing an increase of equity within our district. I recommend revising the language used to identify the superintendent's focus areas to reflect the type of language that is also used in the Seattle and Baltimore policies. Specifically, when it comes to the Baltimore City Equity Policy Plan, they give a purpose that provides a thorough explanation for the reason of an equity policy. I appreciate the inclusion of definitions in section 2. We should note that if we want to incorporate their policy into our language model, there is a typo in section 2 under equity lens. Section 3, policy standards, provides indicators and goals for the district to move towards and develop equitable policies. Again, this aligns with every step movement that our board is working towards. Outcomes that are focused on students, goals where we can have KPI, so performance, key performance indicators. So again, I like and appreciate that part of their policy. This section also empowers Baltimore City to identify the internal and external drivers of equitability in the district. And I think that's something we need to be mindful of as well. There are external drivers that we have no control over that will influence the equity within our district. Sections 3, 4, and 5 also lend to the identification of key performance indicators and the assignment of goals and responsibilities, which is, in my opinion, a good way of controlling for introducing strategic change with our administration. Who's responsible for what? When should they have it done? And how should they do it? What resources are we bringing to bear on that? So those were some of the things that I definitely appreciated with the Baltimore model. The Seattle model has a significant strength of the policy. A significant strength of the Seattle policy is that it identifies concrete strategies across 8 areas for building an equitable district. Based upon the board retreat that we had the other day, I'm not sure we want to stretch ourselves as far as 8 areas. We might want to start with 5 or 4 or something that we see as more manageable. But hey, we might want to go as far as saying 9 or 10, but I do think it would be useful, beneficial for us to move towards what the Seattle plan has and defining those areas as well.
Thank you, Tina. Somebody else? Francis? You just have to unmute yourself. Francis, you're on. Oh, there you go.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I was very impressed by Seattle's implementation strategy. I see that on that first page, they specifically talk about several very strong objectives to meet the goals of equity. And they specifically talk about raising achievement, workforce equity, and very strong objectives to meeting the overall goal of equity. And I think that in the Seattle policy, that was probably the one that I thought was very strong.
Thank you.
Probably because I'm a policy person, so I like objectives that are very strong, that are aimed towards those lofty goals that we have, those action plans,
Yeah.
and implementation strategy.
Who have we not yet heard from?
So Chair Brown, this is Joellen. Couple of things that I was first of all, let me say that I do think that if we are utilizing the old policy from Columbus, we definitely need to beef up and make more robust along the lines of the Seattle policy, the A through G indicators and the programs that we are seeking to achieve equity in. But one thing that I thought was lacking from all of the policies, and it may have been just felt like it was understood but not specified, and that is the ongoing nature of continuing to ensure that there is equity in our district. It didn't seem to me that some of the policies seemed to me to indicate, we would achieve all of these things and then we're done. And I think that is absolutely not what we are trying to do. So I wanted to point that out as well. But I both the Baltimore policy to me seemed very specific. And in being specific, that's great, but can also be constraining at times. The Seattle policies seem to have a little more flexibility in how to achieve the various goals. So I think that's just a decision that this committee needs to make on whether or not we think the board needs flexibility in designing equity across the district, or if we think the board needs more direction in attaining that equity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm aware that Kevin from our internal audit team had sent a few suggestions, including on this policy. And I don't know how widely those were distributed, or if you got them, whether you were able to read the Post-it notes that Kevin had attached electronically. Eric, do you have that in a version that you can display, or?
Give me 1 second, and I am happy to do so. Mr. Sankowski is available here at the committee today as well.
Great. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Just quickly, though, so that you don't spend a lot of time on it, as far as the equity policy goes, I'm by no means anywhere close to having any kind of expert knowledge about equity. And my comment specifically about the equity policy was just on the one that is currently in place. And it really was just to point out that there's a couple of paragraphs in there that seem to basically kind of speak to the exact same thing. And that's just like those two big paragraphs right in the middle of the first page. And so I don't want you to spend a lot of time on any comments that I might have on equity, because that was really more of a language and format suggestion. And clearly you folks are going to dive into a lot greater and deeper topics and provisions in a policy that go far beyond that. But I do appreciate you considering those any comments that either I make or anyone from the Office of Internal Audit. So thank you for that.
Appreciate that. Thank you for taking a look and at this one, as well as at the other policies that we may get to. Thank you. Some other thoughts.
I do, Mr. Chair, just want to acknowledge that, again, I like what Baltimore and Seattle do in terms of identifying the scale and scope of what equity are from a definitive standpoint. I think Baltimore does that the best. I like Seattle's very comprehensive layout from a goal perspective of what they're trying to achieve. and the subsequent mandate that they're making on part of the superintendent. Albeit I like, I'm kind of scaling through here. I like what Baltimore states a little more definitively. The CEO is responsible for ensuring the provisions, and however we align this, if there is some Ohio Revised Code that is equity-based or equity-focused, or maybe even some sort of organization that we could look to as a guiding best practices model, if you will, for equity. So you know how audit professionals, to Kevin's point, audit professionals have a overarching organization by which they derive their kind of guiding policies, guiding ethics, that kind of piece, their best practices. If there's such an organization that could be referred to for equity, perhaps we're framing this based on what they feel that the best practices are. Then we make the CEO, superintendent, the designee, will operationalize it, and something that makes a long-term commitment to making sure that there's not only a plan but staff on hand to execute on this. I think that being broad in the way that Seattle identifies it in terms of scope and scale, being definitive the way that Baltimore identifies it, and then the execution or implementation aspect of it that is board and superintendent focused, with a commitment to a staff person moving forward who will be responsible for this. I think is a great framework that we could start with that helps us move this forward.
Thank you. Sounds as though everybody favors the approaches that Baltimore and Seattle have taken. Is there anybody who wants to focus on any other policy, any other schools policy? Interesting.
Eric, can
Go ahead.
I don't, so I did not approach the review of the policies in terms of which one was better than the other. I approached them on the merits that they each had something that we could learn from and incorporate into our model. So with that being said, the Cincinnati Public School model is a policy that provides an array of value statements that should foster and contribute to an equitable district. The policy implicitly and explicitly identifies key performance indicators and the assignments of goals and responsibilities, which again is a good way of controlling the process for introducing strategic change. So I think it's important to note again that in terms of my review and which you assigned us to do, I looked at the merit of each one in terms of us being able to learn something to apply in our district.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was wondering whether anybody was going to get to Cincinnati. There were aspects of the Cincinnati policy that I liked, especially I think that the resolution, the second part of what they did was good and strong, and maybe something we want to consider in addition to adopting the policy. That the board, all 7 of us might be able to, sign on and adopt at the same time as we do the policy. It makes the statement much stronger, I think. Well, what we need to do then from here is decide which template we want to work from, and start fashioning some language, including good ideas from any of these or elsewhere from your own thoughts. Anybody want to suggest a good starting point?
Just from a technical standpoint, just so everyone's aware, I can copy and paste any of the items I've got. Based on some of the comments I heard, I've got Seattle's already kind of in a template. I can do the same thing with Baltimore's fairly quickly if we want to use that as the starting off point. And then we have obviously the CCS policy, former CCS policy, which is in board docs already. So just let me know which one you want. You may need to give me a moment just to get it set up, but we can get underway right after that.
Of course, thank you. Starting point suggestion, which template? Anybody have thoughts?
It sounded to me, Chair, that most people like the format of the Baltimore policy, which was a little more specific and a little more detailed. Although I think the preamble language in Seattle was noted as good preamble language. So maybe the format of Baltimore with the preamble from Seattle.
That makes some sense, and that's consistent with what I've heard. I know from my perspective. Oh, go ahead.
I would actually switch that around. I think it's the purpose of the Baltimore plan that immediately establishes why you need it. Very specifically, when it comes to a preamble, I think that's nice language that makes people feel good. We are a board that has been elected and duly elected by the community to take action and to have purpose. And so I think we need to be very intentional and decide, do we want a preamble versus an immediate, here's our purpose and why we're establishing it.
My thought is that the preamble language, where I do agree with you, the preamble language in my mind is that of establishing purpose. It is establishing the framework of what it is that we're trying to achieve. Why is this important? To me, it's kind of the purpose and preamble piece are all the same. They serve the same purpose of establishing what this exactly is and what its intent is. So I like us to have a purpose or preamble section that is followed by a definition section. And I really like what Baltimore uses in terms of their definitions. I think those should be inclusive.
I like Baltimore's purpose. I think we should lead with a purpose statement, boldly clarified as, Baltimore does. So I like Baltimore's purpose. We should lead with a purpose, boldly fonted versus the preamble.
I think I fall somewhere in the middle here. We're basically trying, it sounds like we're trying to write a mini strategic plan, sort of, about how equity is established in the district. And so I think you can actually have an introduction, like your preamble, and then you really should specify your purpose or your mission. So if you can draft a mission or a vision or both, and you have guiding principles. These are all things we sort of touched on without naming them specifically as that. So I think to be, as board member Pierce said, to relate to why we're all here in the first place, to describe that context in which we find ourselves really does necessitate that preamble, that introduction. But then if we're to do anything, we really do need to have not ironclad, but a very thoughtfully written purpose to establish all that falls within the rest of the equity policy. So I think you actually can do both quite well and probably accomplish more for it.
I think so too. And I guess in my mind, I think that we can do both. There's certainly some duplication, some overlap that we want to try to eliminate if we do both. But I think that that a preamble does make sense to start with. That stating clearly our purpose is very important. And I, from the very beginning, liked the idea of setting out some very clear definitions, definitions that contrast the terms equity and equality, because I think that we all know what's meant. I think the board all knows what's meant, but at some point we're going to encounter people in the community, whether they be parents or otherwise, who want to, whose child is not receiving the same resource that another child is receiving, and says that's not fair. And I think talking about the definitions very explicitly, and why it's necessary to apply resources based on student needs is fair, is important. So I think if we work with a preamble from Seattle, then a purpose from Baltimore, and the definitions from Baltimore, all of those various parts need some tweaking, both to adjust it to Columbus as well as to pare it down and avoid some duplication, is a good starting point. And I think from there, what I believe all would like to see is a fairly robust statement about the actions that need to be taken, who's responsible for those, and how we monitor progress, how often there's a report to the board, how often there's a report to the community, some ideas like that. Does that make sense?
Eric, I guess, and I'm going to come back to this piece again. The preamble for me is fluffy language. Baltimore basically starts out, and I want to just propose the language. Eric, Dr. Rausch, if you could put Baltimore City's policy, they get it. Here's the purpose, here's why we need it, and it's straight, direct to the point. We don't need the fluffy, we're committed to this, we're committed to that. We need to get into business. And here's the business. Columbus City acknowledges the historical, generational, and compounding realities of the system structures and practices that have intentionally created and continue to afford advantages to some groups while perpetrating inequities. So we would remove racial and broaden that scope to inequities for others. The district takes responsibility and action for removing and actively repairing these inequities to ensure positive educational outcomes for our students.
Okay. Did you have in mind to continue the next two paragraphs in purpose?
I just want to start us
Okay.
there. Because again, for me, the preamble to me, let's get to the business. here's what we acknowledge, and Baltimore does that very concisely, very succinctly, and we have a superintendent that's committed to doing that as well. So let's just be very intentional and concise and direct in this policy.
I understand that. And some other thoughts about that?
Eric,
Yes.
what in front of me is a part of the bottom of the second paragraph, starting with rather than continue to perpetuate and continue to institutional racism.
I'm sorry. And it's still in Baltimore.
Yes, sir.
In the third paragraph?
Yeah, in front of me on my iPad is a third paragraph, but yeah, Eric just separated it. I'm kind of looking at it on two screens and it's formatted differently.
Yeah.
I would eliminate that first rather than sentence and just begin with Columbus City Schools or our Board of Education, district administrators, and school, because I can't see it on there, and school-based staff will work together to da-da. Yeah, Board of Education.
Again, I would broaden the scope from just racial to expand our diversity umbrella.
Agreed.
Yep, so I would remove that. I would take out families of color, and maybe we could think about, no, I would leave families, children, and families. I wouldn't say just of colors, but maybe underrepresented, marginalized. This will help us to, again, note that we have students that are learning the English language. We have families that have students that are gender fluid. We have families that are economically disadvantaged. It just allows us to expand how we define diversity in our district.
I want to build on that. I think it's important to build on that by identifying those groups, and Seattle does a wonderful job of that. In their second kind of purpose preamble language, the concept of educational equity goes beyond formal equality, where all students are treated the same, to fostering a barrier-free environment where all students, regardless of their race, class, or other personal characteristics, such as, so if we were to say this statement right here, we will allocate resources to replace those inequitable practices, systems, and structures with new ones to ensure that we provide equitable education and environmental blank, and because that picture's in the way, and families who are underrepresented and marginalized based on creed, color, religion, ancestry, and I think that's where we include that.
So you're saying in the second paragraph from Seattle and placing it, incorporating it into where we left off with underrepresented. I like that piece. Dr. Roush, are you able to see that?
So, so when we say who are underrepresented and marginalized, we would say for purposes of or because of creed, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, age, economic status, gender. It spells it all out. And I think it's important to spell it all out.
So yeah, that's the, Dr. Ross, are you able to see that? Yes.
He's putting it in right now.
I like that. Fostering we will marginalize families regardless of their race, class. School parents.
Thank you for that inclusion. I think that's really intentional on our part.
Is there anything that we are leaving out with being creed, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, age, economic?
I would say instead of national origin, putting immigration status. I mean, they're not, I could see like a world in which someone is a citizen, but originally from another country. So it's not entirely inclusive of them. So either both or
Both, I think.
okay. And then I would say, so the phrase including, so underrepresented and marginalized, I think marginalized is really the best word here, not because if we were having a different conversation about like corporate boards or elected office holders, underrepresented would have more context, but here we're just talking about those in schools. I think that's slightly awkward phrasing here.
Great catch. I'm for removing it. Good call. So we're keeping age, removing who are, so we're removing the underrepresented, and we're just keeping students and families who are marginalized. Yes.
That the correct change?
Uh-huh.
The disability rights section is a little bit awkward here. The use of a trained guide dog or service animal is just, it's kind of antiquated and doesn't quite cover everything. I would suggest person first language to simply say, you know, a person will not discriminate against a person with a disability or a person who needs reasonable accommodations because of a disability.
I like that because those accommodations can come in a variety of different shapes and forms. Yeah. And I think that even acknowledges our need to be more mindful about our IEP, our 504 plans, our the accommodations that we make for our students who have different learning styles.
Yeah. So Ms. White, you want me to replace this phrasing with
person with a disability? Because I don't think you need to specify, you know, all types of disabilities, but person with a disability or person who needs accommodations because of a disability.
Yeah, I agree. I kept tripping over that trained guide dog as well.
I would like to say, or persons identified with a disability, and I'll gingerly disagree. I think it's important. We, in our community, in our education community, not just here locally, but throughout the country, we identify disabilities very succinctly, whether they are mental, whether or learning disabilities, whether they are physical disabilities, and even, as it was said, sensory or emotional. So we work to address all of these things very definitively with individualized education plans. I mean, so I think it's important that we do say mental, physical, sensory, or emotional, something to that effect. I think we should incorporate that language.
Sure. I really don't think that we should put person identified with a disability though, because that puts the onus on somebody else to do the identification.
Yes.
So I would just say a person with a disability.
If we, oddly enough, if we didn't do that work, if we didn't identify students with disabilities, I would agree with you, but we actually do that work. We have specialists who actually identify students with disabilities.
No, of course, we have the child find duty, but it's not, this equity policy though doesn't just apply to our students, it's also going to apply to our teachers, support staff, family members who have a disability. So it, you know, I understand that it's going to be, you know, more broad than that.
I think I'm going to put on my teacher hat for a second here. I think it's also important for us to not put identified in, because oftentimes we are helping students identified. And what this policy states is that our action is to make sure that we're providing an equitable classroom, building, district for them, even if they're not.
Okay,
Thinking about that student that doesn't get identified until they're in high school. And it's like,
Yeah.
wow, we missed this in elementary and in middle school.
got
I mean,
you.
there are even ideas too, of, like, I mean, we could go towards, you know, universal design or accessibility principles that really are designed to really level barriers, but we're still in a district that has 100-year-old buildings that are not accessible. So, you know, we've got a ton of work to do, not to mention restraint and seclusion of hundreds of students with disabilities, even in our district within the past 5 years. So there, I mean, there's work to do there as well.
Yes, there is. But staying on track with what we're trying to do here, a person, persons, I think there should be an apostrophe, a parenthesis with an S, struggling or suffering with could.
No, no suffering.
Say struggling.
But I think just, or people with disabilities.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, what I did like that I don't think we put into the sentence thus far is Committee Member White did say needing accommodations, requiring accommodations. I think we need to put that accommodation piece in there. A person with a disability needing accommodations, requiring accommodations. The way you said it was very well stated.
Thanks. Yeah, I would suggest that we say we don't discriminate against people with disabilities, and we don't discriminate against people who need accommodations because of it.
There needs to be an or there.
Not everybody who has a disability is necessarily going to want to self-identify or request or need accommodations. Sometimes you might really want to just be treated the same as everybody else, but also acknowledging that equality does require different treatment for people who have disabilities.
So I've just got a grammatical, because now if take everything out and it would read regardless of their people with a disability. So we need to, I think we just need to clean. Would it be a people with a status with a disability or people with a, I mean, I'm just regardless of their, and if you go down, you get a grammatical.
Yeah, I'd go back to person with a disability. Or needing accommodation.
Or we could put disability status, and that might grammatically pull it back together with the rest of the.
That actually does work better, yes.
Disability status or need for disability related accommodations.
Love it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe we touched this second paragraph yet, unless I'm correct, unless I'm mistaken. If I missed something, I apologize.
We did not touch the paragraph yet.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm.
And again, we've got students of color that we want to change.
Now, this one is a little bit different because we're beginning to talk about the disproportionate disciplinary actions that are taken based upon research, based upon some of our historical data within the district. We know that our Black and Brown students are disproportionately receiving disciplinary action.
I would include in that though, because I totally agree with you. And this is not just national research. This is our own research in the past 5 years. I would include students with disabilities as well. We know for a fact that students with disabilities and also students of color are disproportionately disciplined in comparison to a different group of scale of students.
I think that listing those two tends to exclude others who may be disadvantaged versus privileged. And I think we may want to use the broader terms here, certainly inclusive of students of color and disabled, but we've also got LGBTQ, and we've got plenty of others who are treated inequitably. And I think the broader language works better for this paragraph.
I think this paragraph is an opportunity to call out how how discrimination, no matter whom it's against, manifests. So in terms of, we already have graduation outcomes and the disciplinary action piece is huge. But I would agree that I don't think we need to go through and specify each. I would also say, not to beat a dead horse here, that if we're calling this all a purpose, using the purpose section, but really the purpose is that last paragraph. The language we're working through right now is very much the style of that introductory preamble language we talked about before. So I think that it's important to include it, but I would say it isn't actually the purpose. It provides context for the purpose you set out for the district.
I agree with that, Kelsey. I would pull that down and put that under our, and I'm not sure if we're going to continue to call it policy standards, but for me, that piece becomes one of our key performance indicators. Once we this policy, we should be able to, at any point, get data on those students that are disproportionately disciplined. We should know the demographics of those students so we can begin to chart out a decrease in those disciplinary actions for those students. So for me, this becomes an important performance indicator of how this policy is working.
Agreed.
So does this come out of here and go somewhere else?
No.
Now, see, it depends on which template we go with, because when we look at the Seattle plan, they kind of get equitable access, workforce equity, you know, they go to the model a little bit different than if we go with the Baltimore.
So Eric and committee, I think that there's an easy fix here to incorporate that, still maintain that we want KPIs around this. So I would start this, I wouldn't say just through this policy, I would say in accordance to, or in accordance with our, we have a non-discrimination policy. Gotta go to board.
And Phil has just provided us in the chat with the language from that policy. Thank you, Phil.
Kindly. Thank you very kindly. So we could even cite the policy in accordance with policy, our non-discrimination policy, blank, blank, blank. Thank you. It's 2260. Hey, yes. Discrimination. No, get rid of that. Yes, yes. There you go. Columbus City Schools owns its role in creating and implementing policies and practices that result in predictably lower academic and graduation outcomes. District recognize these disparities, contradicts beliefs.
I wonder, there was some language that I really liked out of Baltimore that I think might be able to state this a little more elegantly. It says that racial equity is when you can't predict advantage or disadvantage by race. But I wonder,
It's right here.
I wonder if we could say, oh yeah, but you know, turning that on its head might also work there to say we acknowledge that right now sometimes you can predict advantage or disadvantage. based on protected classes. And so our goal is, well, that you can't.
So is there language you'd like me to add, Ms. White?
I'm just thinking that perhaps instead of having a laundry list of areas like predictably lower academic, graduation, disciplinary action, all of that, we could potentially say, you know, we own a role in implementing policies that predictably result in either advantages or disadvantages. And we recognize that those differences exist right now. And we, well, I mean, I like the last sentence of that paragraph. But I worry is I'll express that by listing a number of specific outcomes, we might be excluding others.
Mm-hmm.
Might I suggest that we take that second paragraph under purpose, Dr. Roush, move that to make it a third paragraph? Then go to Baltimore policy, and in their third paragraph,
I'm in the, this is a cut and paste of Baltimore right now, so just tell me where I need to go.
So I don't see the language anymore. So I'll just read it to you because it says, we will allocate resources to replace those inequities. Do you see that? So it was a purpose paragraph. I don't know where that language went. So you still have to go back up. So it was their third paragraph.
Under policy standards?
Yes. In Baltimore's policy, third paragraph. No, purpose. So it was the third paragraph of purpose.
Did I copy and paste it Baltimore? So did we miss one here?
Short. So here's what their third paragraph says. Rather than continuing to perpetrate and contribute to institutional racism, I would like to recommend that we say, in accordance with policy 2260, non-discrimination, Columbus City Schools owns its role in creating and implementing policies and practices that result in predictably advantages and disadvantages, lower academic and graduation outcomes, and disproportionate disciplinary action. Period.
So I'm going to copy this again. If you'll bear with me, I'm sorry. So I'm just going to dump it here, and then we can work from there. Okay, here's that.
Okay. So put the period. So where you see in accordance with policy 2260.
Yep.
Take that all the way to disciplinary action, hit period, put a period instead of the comma. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Open that up so you can cut and paste.
Okay.
Our board, district, administrators, and schools-based staff will work together to aggressively, so
efficiently.
see where I'm cutting and pasting from Baltimore City?
Yeah.
Yep. Right here.
Yes. Uh-huh.
All the way there?
Yes.
Yes. Provide, but then we take that racial out again, where it says equitable, racially equitable education.
There it is. Yep.
And take out of color and just the family. Then put that last sentence, the district recognizes that we can achieve and ensure conditions of success. Something along those lines.
Right here, the district recognizes that we can achieve
I feel like we need a strong ending sentence before we jump into definitions. So is everybody able to see what I was doing there? I was trying to move us to a point where we've identified why we need the policy. We've identified who the policy is intended to serve, to help, and then tying in that existing policy that we have with 2260, kind of move us to the call to action.
I have a quick question to gain consensus and then ask for an addition. The question is do we see the value of this outcome not only to impact our children, but also our staff? I feel as though we should be staff inclusive as well. I think that this should be the way that we model, not just for our children, but for everybody who works and operates within our confines. So I just think it's a simple inclusion of, in that sentence before your cursor, Eric, where it says environments to children, I would say staff and families.
We want to just use maybe the word community to be the biggest possible universe of equity here. Because I also just think, kids, families need an accessible environment if they're going to participate in their children's education. I think it goes beyond just staff and just students. I agree that it should be a little bit broader.
So you would replace children, staff, and families with environments to the Columbus City Schools community?
Yes.
So Eric, just so we have like a clean version, everybody can just take a moment to read. Can you cut out the rather than sentence and the sentence that is or students of color? Thank you. And sorry about that. I called you Eric, Dr. Rausch.
Okay.
How's everybody feeling about that first sentence? Columbus City Schools owns its role in creating and implementing policies and practices that result in predictable advantages and disadvantages in lower academic and graduation outcomes and disproportionate disciplinary action. How would you guys feel if it just said, we own our role in creating and implementing policies and practices that result in equitable outcomes?
I think, generally I would say I agree that it doesn't make a very good first sentence, period. I think as I read this whole purpose section, the why is missing. Why is this important? It could be as simple as saying, the mission of Columbus City Schools is to X. And so it's important to acknowledge that the district's own system structures and practices have perpetuated existing or inequities among students in order for it to achieve its vision for every, I don't know, it's getting too much into your lingo, but like a vision for every graduate, we must break down those, like change those systems, change those policies. I think the why is probably a good first sentence to relate to your mission. And then to say, we see how we see our role in changing that, and that will require us to change our practices and policies.
Okay, so Kelsey, I like the street that you're on. I think that we're, for the most part, already on it, particularly in the very first sentence under purpose. Columbus City Schools acknowledges the historical, generational, and compounding realities of the systems, structures, and practices that have intentionally created and continue to afford advantages to some groups while perpetuating inequities for others. That's your whole comment right there. The district takes responsibility and action for removing and actively repairing these inequities to ensure positive educational outcomes for our students. And I would extend this sentence to say, in alignment with our district vision, in alignment with our district vision. Right here, you can't see my cursor, unfortunately. It's right, the very top sentence, right under purpose. It is the second sentence. The district takes responsibility.
End of that second sentence.
Yes.
Says students, you will put in alignment with our district. I would say in alignment with our district mission and vision.
And that's fine. Our mission is that each student is highly educated, prepared for leadership and service, and empowered for success as citizens of a global community. So that speaks very intently to your argument, Kelsey.
Yeah, I still like stating this is an important policy. If someone is picking this up and they want to know, they're going to read all of these things, I think contextualizing it with your mission is important, which is why I would say, like, you can even sort of just tweak that second sentence. Let's see here, around the to ensure positive educational outcomes for students, something like that. You first start with your value statement, as in, like, we believe in ensuring every student has a positive educational outcome, period. At the same time, Columbus City Schools acknowledges the historical yada, 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 yada. So I still think it is good to start with your value statement first. But that second sentence is really important. I don't think it needs to change all that much. I just don't think it makes a very good first sentence to your equity policy.
So I would acquiesce to putting that as the second sentence, not as the first sentence, because I think with a policy of this level of importance and significance, we need to start out with a sentence that acknowledges the very real and lived experience of individuals that are living in inequities. And to start this policy out with our mission creates that space in which we haven't been honest to even acknowledge, like, here's the real realities. We have students who are dealing with the digital divide in 2020. We have students who, face the real realities of, will my parent have a job tomorrow? Where are we getting our next meal from? So I think it's upon us to be very clear and intentional with that first sentence and acknowledging there's inequities in our community. Now, I think after you state that, again, I could acquiesce and put our mission in as the second sentence to bring it back to this, we're committed and we believe, but have we shown it to this point? Do we have an equitable district? And it's important for us to, at the onset, state inequality exists in our community, whether we have been the drivers of it or other external factors have been the driver of it.
So where is that not stated at the top? How is that not comprehensive at the top in the very first sentence?
Board Member Pierce.
I think what I hear Kelsey stating is that she would just like to incorporate our value statement and our mission.
Okay.
So compromise a little bit here, and what you said to me just now, Director, or excuse me, Board Member Pierce, is important, and we don't want to bury that information for precisely the reasons you mentioned. So how about this? Leave that first sentence, and then I guess for all those who can recite the mission of Columbus City Schools right now, feel free to use better language than what I'm suggesting. Let's see here. So in order to ensure positive educational outcomes for every student in accordance with the district's mission, comma, the district, I don't know if it's must take responsibility or if you want to keep that tense there, the district takes responsibility for, and then rest of the sentence.
Personally, I think we had it. I think that what we had beautifully balances acknowledging the problem, making a present tense commitment to fixing it. I would eliminate the third paragraph altogether because I think it's entirely repetitive of the second and first. And then I think with the two paragraphs together, I think we've got it.
So do you like it the way Ms. Ellingson put it, or do you want me to leave it the way it's already written?
I liked it the other way because there's a nice symmetry between saying Columbus City Schools acknowledges, and then the district will take action and responsibility. Putting those two sequentially, I think is very powerful, and I think that we had it.
Other thoughts before I hit delete? One leads with to ensure positive educational outcomes. The other leads with the district taking responsibility. Is there a preference between the?
I like the first one.
The first one.
My preference.
Responsibility. We stated with clarity that we understand whether intentional or unintentional that there are systems, things that are outside of us and within our purview that impact equity for our learning community, for our Columbus City School community. We take action. I like it.
So Ms. White is correct. This is largely the same as this up here then. Almost word for word.
Yeah.
Board, district administrators, school staff will work together. We will allocate resources.
So can we just move that? Can we cut out the last two sentences, keep that first sentence and put, so, yep, delete the district recognizes that we can achieve, delete that.
I think even the own the role though is really, that's another way of saying we take responsibility and we take action. Because that they're owning the role, that those are the things that put us in owning the role. And there's something very, I guess, cleaner about just saying it directly. We acknowledge, we take responsibility, and then the next one starts with we will. These are the things that we will do. And if we leave it there, then we can jump right into the specifics of that.
So do we leave that sentence just dangling out there, or do we incorporate it into the second paragraph and jump into the
I would just pull that out altogether, but I mean, I'm not sure what work that sentence is doing that isn't already done in the previous two.
So I think that's connecting this policy to policy 2260, our non-discrimination policy. And it's also incorporating staff, teachers, so people who might not be specifically named yet in this policy.
So what
That's
if we
what I
just
took
say,
it to mean when
yeah,
feeling.
could we just say in accordance with policy 2260, comma, we will allocate resources. So in other words, just take that first clause and stick it in front of the we will allocate resources sentence and then just carry it on home.
I think we got it.
While we're, I think we've made really good progress. I like the discussion. I like that we're getting this done and well written. We've got about 6 more minutes before the time that we've agreed to break. And then the meeting being respectful of everybody's time. Clearly, if we continue through like this, it's going to take quite some time. What I would suggest is that, yes, we wanted to finish this today and be able to present it to the board on the 19th next week, but I don't see that happening. And I don't think that we're going to be able to meet again before the 19th. If it's okay with everybody, including especially our my 2 board colleagues, perhaps we're next scheduled to meet on June 11th. On June 2 is a board meeting, and then another one on 15th. One course would be to simply come back on the 11th and get this wrapped up to present to the board on the 16th of June. And if we were to do that, what I'd like to do is have 1 or 2 people actually write the rest based on our discussion so that we've got a starting point and get a draft out so that we can work on this between now and our next meeting. Does that make sense? Or would anybody prefer to try to schedule a meeting of this committee sooner?
Are there any regulations that prohibit us from using and circulating a Google document with this committee for the express purposes of outlining our definitions and policy standards?
Everything that you all are doing is a public record. So if you had a Google document, just recognize that it would be a public record that folks will need to be able to access.
Mr. Chair and colleagues, I think it's important that we continue to work. My thought would be either that we continue this with an earlier meeting to precede our June meeting, if folks have that time available, so that we all continue the good work of having shared efficacy here. I think a Google document, as effective as it is at times, I think that can just become, I just think that just becomes too jumbled. I don't know. I much prefer this environment where we have the opportunity to be all inclusive, verbally and visually.
So I guess just acknowledging the time constraint and making sure that we come to the meeting prepared with some materials, with some language, with some wording. I think it's a starting point for us to create that document, not just with 2 people, but allowing the entire committee to weigh in on those language that's being created. And then we definitely meet. But I think that Google Doc gets us to a point where we're all focused on writing and articulating where we want this policy to go, what we want this policy to do.
I agree with that. I think that we have to have some writing done and try to get it cohesive. Try to include the various components that we'd like to see, and Google Docs is a good tool for us to do that. And it will give us perhaps a close to finished product when we come back and meet, or it will give us, a great starting point. Eric, can we go ahead and set that up on Google Docs
I will work on doing so.
and make sure that because it's a public document, that it have language that talks about this being in draft and being a working product.
I'll check with legal to make sure that we're not running afoul of anything, and I will follow back up with you if we have any hiccups.
Great. And if I could, ask that everybody, and I thank you all for participating today, and this is the best turnout I think we've had. That you actively try to get work done on this on Google Docs as early as possible. We don't have to wait until the eve of the next meeting to do that.
And certainly, members, if you have your comments or your preferences, I've tried to take notes as I've drafted today. Let me know, because I can pull some of those sections and items out too for greater discussion when we get together again. And Chair Brown, if you'd like me to try to pull the members for a meeting between now and the in the next 2 weeks before we have our next regularly scheduled meeting, I'm happy to do that as well.
Well, I'm good with that idea. Others?
I don't know. I really think that this collaborative real-time discussion has just been so helpful. I've just learned so much from the perspectives that everybody else has. And I hate the idea of us each getting locked into separate documents when I think there's going to be so many areas of overlap, but also new ideas that I think that is getting as many people as possible back together in a room in a public setting would be super valuable, even if the group has to reconvene later to weigh in finally.
I agree.
We can put together a doodle poll and see what dates and times are available for everybody, and we can go from there. I don't know that a lot of folks are going to many places these days, so.
All right. Well, why don't we do that? Get a poll out and identify some dates as early as we can that allows us to meet and continue in this fashion. And please continue to evaluate what we have and to have very specific suggestions for language and for what we include or not include. Tina?
So just to clarify, are we still circulating a Google Doc? The intention is to get that language down on paper. So when we meet, we have some language.
I think so.
Yes.
I think so. I don't think that I think we can do both of those things.
And that's what I think. I think we can, even if every person puts, here are the definitions that are important to me that I want incorporated, here's the type of language that I'm interested in, it gives us a point of discussion to start with. We can jump right into the business that needs to take place our next meeting so we can move even further.
One other suggestion too, I agree with all of the above. I really want to hear more ideas about the accountability piece.
Mhm.
Can we get more, like, I know there's lots of different ways to do this, but we know what the particular problems are. We all have some experience of an inequity in Columbus City schools. And I just keep trying to think, like, would a one-year audit have solved this problem? Well, you know, what ideas can we bring to the fore? And we've got some samples here, but those are the pieces that I would love to hear more ideas. And I think we're still really early days. We were able to hammer down the overarching piece, but the mechanism to make sure this actually happens, I still feel is like such a blank slate here.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
would
where
just
I would think that all of us adding that input in before we meet will become important, because Chair Brown, you and Dr. Roush would then be able to look at our union contracts, look at our existing policies, and begin to determine, hey, here are the constraints, here are the boundaries, here are some things that we might need to address, you know, in conjunction to this equity policy.
Mhm.
So I think that's spot on with what Committee Member White is saying. Spot on.
Well, why don't we do that? I agree with you all on the need for accountability, for monitoring and reporting and accountability. And we have to be pretty clear and specific about that to make sure that we do and carry out what this policy says when we complete it. Anything else?
Do you want me to again shoot for a 90-minute meeting, or do you want me to try to go 2 hours for the next one?
If we can, 2 hours might be helpful. I don't think any more than that, but I know that people's schedules are different these days than in the past. Why do we aim for that?
I'll put that out in the doodle poll.
Good. Anything else for the good of the order? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I motion that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
That motion carried. You are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Great work today.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Yes.